All right, we are live. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome to the stage here Mr. Jeff Shaara. I don't think an introduction really is necessary for the audience who watches my videos.
Well, thank you.
Yes, sir. And Matt Beat is actually joining us today, too, to ask a few questions of Mr. Shaara. And we're really going to kick it off here to talk about Jeff and his career. Over the course of his career, he's written many different books spanning many different periods of history, and he's definitely well known for his Civil War works, particularly Gods and Generals and Last Full Measure. And most recently, he produced The Old Lion, which was about Theodore Roosevelt. A very exceptional work. Jeff, I commend you on the type of work that you've done, and I'm definitely a huge fan myself.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I didn't set out to do this. It just sort of fell into it on the heels of my father. My father wrote The Killer Angels, which won a Pulitzer Prize and is the basis for the movie Gettysburg. But he passed away 5 years before that movie came out. So they came to me and said, "Gee, we want to make more movies. Wouldn't it be great to take your father's book and go in both directions?" And because the Killer Angels only covers 4 days.
Yeah.
So go back to the beginning of the war, then go all the way to the end of the war. I had never written anything before, but I thought it was something
Wow.
I'd like to try to do. And I told him that. We had the conversation with the directors that if whatever I come up with stinks, it goes into trash. Nobody will ever see it. So there was no fear. There was no expectation. And that started that was 30 years ago. So here I am.
That's pretty amazing
Mhm.
right there. With your father's legacy being so large and looming so large in historical fiction, how was it you were able to find your own voice in writing these two books?
Well, that was a fear. It was a fear from people who knew me and my sister. Said as long as you accept the fact that if you write something, every single critic is going to say, "Well, it's no Killer Angels." So as
Yeah.
long as you get used to that, and you'll be fine. So I started putting Gods and Generals together, and at one point she said, "This is being written by the ghost of our father."
Mm,
And I started thinking that that's not a good thing because that means I'm mimicking his style.
yeah.
And so, whose writing have I read more of than anybody's? And it makes sense. So I started thinking about that and just sort of got away from that. And by the time I did, I don't know, Last Full Measure and then the Mexican War story, Gone for Soldiers, I really felt I had friends telling me, "I hear you now. I don't hear your father," which was, a really nice thing to hear.
No, absolutely. And there I can definitely tell the difference between the writing styles myself. Just putting it out there, there's definitely a different style. Matt, you have any questions right now you want to kick off for him?
Well, Jeff, just I have tremendous respect for what you do, and you have a prolific career. But I want to tell you, like, I'm generally, um, I'm typically not a fan of historical fiction, and so like I'm coming at this kind of like as an outsider, and so like, but I do have very fond memories as a kid watching Gettysburg based off of your
Mhm.
father's book, and I did check out some of your books, and it's a very captivating style. It's a great way, frankly, just to trick people into learning American history, and that's I just thank you for doing what you do and spending some time with us because we're that's I feel like that's what most of us history tubers do. We're just trying to get people interested in this stuff,
Right.
because
Yes.
the three of us are obviously interested in this stuff anyway. So yeah.
Yeah, one of the things that I started hearing from teachers who were using my books, and particularly the American Revolution books, for whatever reason, they were using them in their classroom to teach history. And I thought that was strange because they're novels. And then I began to hear from the teachers that if you can give the student a character that they can relate to or a character they
Mhm.
get interested in, they don't even know they're learning the history.
Right.
And so since then, I've actually heard from quite a few teachers, which is a talk about a flattering thing to hear. Um, but yeah, I've also heard from a lot of people who say, "Nah, I don't read fiction," or the Civil War. Yeah, I would never read a novel about the Civil War, and then they read my father's book and it changes their life.
Yeah.
I've run into that a lot. I hated history in school. I never wanted to pick up a history book ever, and now I've read Gods and Generals, and now I'm bringing my kids to Gettysburg.
Yeah.
I hear that a lot, which is really nice and it's very flattering. But I think the point is sort of like what you touched on, is that just because it's a novel, first of all, it doesn't mean it's all fake.
Right.
You
Yeah.
can. Yeah, I mean, I've had historians say, "Gee, you can write anything you want because you're writing fiction." I don't do that.
Yeah.
I try to get the facts straight. But uh, the historians that sort of poo-pooed the historical fiction, gradually I've won them over, which is kind of neat. I mean, I've some of these historians are really good friends of mine now, and they've sort of thrown in the towel as far as fighting with me. That they accept that these books are bringing people into the subject. That's a
Yes.
good thing for everybody.
It is. It is. Bill on the board here asked, what's your number one rule for writing this historical fiction? Like, if you had a number one rule that you stick to all the time, what would that rule be?
There's probably more than one, and I'll be brief with this, because my father taught creative writing at Florida State, and some of his lessons sort of stuck with me. If you're going to write anything, it
Yeah.
doesn't matter what it is, tell a good story.
Uh,
Don't write. I mean, write something that, first of all, write something you're excited about. If you're not
yeah.
excited about it, why would anybody else want to read it? Why would I want to read your story if you're like, oh, here's something it might be, it might be okay. No, that doesn't work.
Right.
The other thing is, my father used to tell his students, use the BIC method,
Hmm.
BIC, butt in chair. It's
Ah.
not going to happen unless you sit down and do it. And don't worry about whether or not you can write or whether or not it's any good. That's somebody else's judgment. That'll come later. Just put it down, get it on paper, get the story complete, and do the best job you can. And I am testament to the fact that anybody can do this. I mean, I
Yeah.
started when I was 40 years old, and it's my whole life now. So yeah, don't be bashful about that, and don't sell yourself short.
Absolutely. So I noticed you mentioned building up a character. You talked about building up a character to try to get somebody drawn into history.
Mhm.
And I had a Twitter follower or ex follower that asked the question, what inspires you more in character buildup? Is it more of a leadership style, as in a leader or an officer, or is it the guy that's in the trenches, the person that's the everyday person that's just there doing their job?
Well, I do both now. I mean, I started out doing what my father did, was generals, right from the top down.
Right.
And so I wrote that way until I got to World War One.
Mm,
And I realized in World War One, the generals are back there. I mean, they're
yeah.
10 miles away. You need that kid. You need the grunt out there who's facing, the enemy shooting at him as he shoots at the enemy. You need that story.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it just doesn't work. And then that carries right through World War Two. I went back to the Civil War, did a 4-book set, and used that same principle. Let's have some privates. Let's have the guys that can be, that you can sort of do anything you want with them. I mean, it makes them fun. Memoirs, diaries, collections of letters, that's the research which is much more easy to find for the generals.
Yeah.
Much more, Patton and George Marshall and Ike. There's a lot of stuff you can find about them, a lot of original material. But what about the private whose name you don't even know? What I do is take 4 or 5 of them and look, read whatever I can, take 4 or 5 of them, and then make a composite character out of that.
Oh, okay.
And so, and people ask me that all the time, is this guy for real? Well, yeah, because he's based on about 4 or 5 guys. But so
Wow.
everything happened, everything's real. The character, I make up a name. The character is a composite character, and that seems to work. I mean, because if you're going to do the grunts, you've got to figure out a way to do that, and I think that works. The way I'm doing it is by making composites.
Very cool.
Mhm.
So Matt, I don't know about you, but when I'm on these fields, like just for an example, I was out at one of these old railroad depots, and I was out there with the folks with the Civil War trails, and they were punching holes in the ground and putting signs up. And I was thinking about how hot it was out there, and how we're just sitting there having laughter and conversation together, and no one's there to witness that. Those are the kind of small moments throughout history that a lot of people would like to get their heads wrapped around. Those small moments with those soldiers on those fields that they're never really going to understand or know about. I mean, what's your take
Mhm.
on that?
I was in Miami at a book thing, and somebody, I won't mention, somebody very famous was sitting in the front row, which is kind of cool. And he pipes up in the middle of my talk and says, all this talk about the soldiers in the Civil War wearing wool, that's a crock. They would have died of the heat if they'd have worn wool. I'm thinking, well, what did they wear? I mean, it's not like there was, a lot of stuff hanging around. So I actually talked to some people, reenactors and people into this who knew more than I did. I said, okay, what's the deal here? And they said they wore wool because it makes them sweat.
Mhm.
Immediately they sweat. That cools them off. And it's like, what concept? I had no idea of that. But, there's a lot of that where people are skeptical. People have doubts about the way things are done. Fine. I mean, everybody's entitled to their opinion. My job is to tell an honest story that hopefully, people will get something out of.
Yeah, for sure. Matt, you look like you might have a question there.
No, I just like it's fascinating to me because I also was a fan of the series Band of Brothers, and I feel like what you do is similar to that. With, I mean, you got to kind of reel them in a little. Like if somebody's not into history, you kind of reel them in with a familiar name like Robert E. Lee. Most people have heard of that person. So, but then once you get them in, like you can try to like get them into these lesser known folks. And I guess how do you balance that? Because I feel like it's the same thing with making videos. Like you want to get them to click on the video in the first place. And if they're not familiar with anything with the subject, you really want to teach them this lesson that they don't care about or they don't know about.
Right.
So yeah, how do you find that balance?
Yeah, I am. Now that I think of it, I talked about using the grunts, putting words in the mouths of sort of anonymous characters. But you've got to have, as you say, the famous guy. You've got to have a well-known character. World
Yeah.
War One, you got to have Blackjack Pershing and the Red Baron. I mean, you got to have people that people have heard of those characters. When I went back and did the Civil War series, the War in the West, the one character who's in all four books and is a larger than life character is Sherman. What a
Mm.
great character that is to write. I had a lot of fun with that, but that makes right off the bat. I mean, the appeal of that, it adds something to it. And then you have the other characters too. I have an escaped slave, on the fourth book, the Fateful Lightning, Sherman's March across Georgia and into the Carolinas. And these slaves are running away from the plantations because their owners are gone. They're getting out of the way of Sherman. So all of a sudden you've got 30, 40,000 African Americans following the army because they don't know what else to do.
Yeah.
And I mean that's a story all by itself. And I think it appeals to people when you have something that's interesting that they don't know.
Right. Well, so writing about these things, you're literally writing about life's tragedies. You're writing stories that you're probably going to have to get almost into the minds of the people that had to live through those tragedies. Has any of that work that you've done changed your look on humanity?
Oh yeah. I mean, first of all, the tragedy part of it, you have to be careful not to overdo it. I
Yeah.
mean, not to make it too cliche. So then, it would be easy to say, okay, in every book I'm doing, every story I'm telling, there's one guy's got to die. No, that's easy, and I guess you can do that, and in some books it does happen, but you don't have to do it through all of them. The tragedy's enough that it is. In my World War One book, I mean, the kids coming home on the ship, the troop ship, and they're passing into New York Harbor, and everybody's looking at the Statue of Liberty, which is the big cliche of coming into New
Yeah.
York Harbor. He's looking the other way. He's looking out the back of the ship, thinking, why am I the only one that came home? I mean, there's something he's going to carry with him his whole life. So, it doesn't have to be blood and guts, and that's one thing. That's one thing Ted Turner taught me when he was doing Gettysburg and then Gods and Generals, is he did not want to see blood and guts. You can tell the story without reverting to that, and he's absolutely right.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, with such a polarizing topic as the American Civil War, though, what do you feel your role is in all of this, helping people understand it?
I don't know. That's sort of putting the responsibility on me to be a teacher.
Okay.
And I really feel much more like I'm an entertainer. I mean, again,
Yeah.
getting back to what I said before about my father, tell a good story. If it's a good story, it'll be entertaining.
Yeah.
And if there's a lesson there, and sometimes there may be a lesson there I'm not even aware of. But if there's a lesson, okay, people can get that. But I want them to read my book and come away saying, God, that was great. I really liked that story. Then I've succeeded. That's my goal.
Very cool. Very cool. Matt, what kind of books are you into?
I read a lot of presidential biographies, and so that's why what caught my attention that I wasn't aware of till recently, that you had written a book about one of my favorite presidents, Theodore Roosevelt, The Old Lion, which came out a couple of years ago. So one of my questions actually for you, Jeff, was um, how, like, first of all, why did you decide to make a book about Teddy Roosevelt, as opposed to any other one figure in American history? Because this was a departure from your previous works.
My editor and I sat down and went through a laundry list of American individuals, famous Mark Twain, Henry
Oh,
Ford, I mean,
yeah,
on and on and on, I mean, all the
so
way
many.
down the list, all these people. And I kept going back to TR. I said, this guy, he's fun. He's fun to write. His life is extraordinary from the time he's a child right up through the time his mother and his wife die the same day, which is you talk about
Same house.
tragedy.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. And then from the Rough Riders, going to Cuba, and that whole story, and then the story of him going out west in the Dakotas, and then the presidency. And interesting, I thought of everything about his life. To me, now, in my opinion, the presidency is the least interesting. I mean, he did
Yeah.
cool stuff on the Panama
Yeah.
Canal, and he settled the Russo-Japanese War, which got him a Nobel Peace Prize. But it's what he did otherwise. It's what he did outside the White House that was. And by the way, I'm happy to say this because people have given me grief. The White House was not called the White House until 1901.
Yeah.
Abraham Lincoln, I just finished that manuscript. Abraham Lincoln, it was the executive mansion.
Mansion. Yeah.
Well, you read a lot of books and they all call it the White House. No.
Not until
So,
Teddy.
yeah, I was happy to sort of clear that up.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, just like after he left the presidency, he didn't even stop. Like, okay, now I'm going to go to Africa, and then ran for president again. That didn't work out. Now I'm going to go to the Amazon. It's just like
Exactly.
he was a thrill
Yeah, and the
seeker.
story of him, that's the last big story in my book is the Amazon,
Yeah,
and the river of no return, and which almost kills him. I mean, almost kills
yeah,
his son. I mean, so the two of them are down there. They're lucky they got out, but it's a great story. I mean, there's intrigue, there's suspense. I mean, it's really cool.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's those little stories that you build up inside those books that really paints a picture for people too. One of my all-time favorite books is The Last Full Measure, hands down. And especially given the time that we're in right now with 1865, 2025, and we just had the anniversary of Appomattox and all of that stuff. Um, One of the more striking stories in there to me was the description of Lee at Spotsylvania, and hearing about one of his supposed enemies, but a known officer that was killed on the lines, and how he expressed how he felt about that.
Yeah.
And when you stand on a battlefield like Spotsylvania and you have those stories to kind of reference back inside of your brain, it paints that gloomy picture of the rain coming down, and the
Mhm.
and the feeling that those people must have felt when they heard people that just a few years ago were their friends, their comrades,
Mhm.
that are passing away on the other side.
Yep.
Um, have you ever gone out to a battlefield with the stories that you've written yourself, and then some of that comes back to you, and it really just broadens your horizon about that field?
Yeah, I mean, in both ways. I've been out because I do a lot of research by going out to battlefields before I write anything, and then afterward. Then if I go out there afterward, I know what happened. I mean, I know
Yeah.
this is there, this is there. You mentioned Spotsylvania. What a great story! What a great battlefield where you've got the miserable weather, pouring rain, and the Union Hancock's corps is approaching the stone wall, but they go down into a dip,
Yeah.
and the guys behind the wall who are suffering, looking at the rainstorm, they have no idea. And all of a sudden, Hancock's men walk up, and there they are. And then the Confederates get ready to open fire, and their powder's wet. I
Yep.
mean, everything click, 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 and I mean, that's a pretty cool story. Um, yeah, Spotsylvania is a good one. But no, like I say, I'll go. I went there first, and with a guide and find out things. But the reason I got so involved with the American Battlefield Trust, which used to be the Civil War Trust, is
Right.
because of what they do to preserve land like that. It's so important, to so everybody can go see that. And I mean, I still support what they do. I was on their board for 6 years, but anytime you have the place to go to a real battlefield, and in a good state of preservation, with no Taco Bell out in the middle of the field, go, because you especially Gettysburg. I mean, where I live, you'll get something out of it.
Yeah.
And a lot of people tell me it changed them. It changed their family, and now the family's coming back every year. I hear that a lot.
Yeah, for sure. It's almost like, for example, Gettysburg, people go back and they make that trip again and again.
Mhm.
And it's almost like the veterans when they come back to those fields, they're going back to live through those stories again.
One of the things I got a big kick out of early on when I was in Gettysburg is I was up on Little Round Top, and I look, there's a young couple, like college age couple, and he's doing this. He's like pointing and telling his wife or girlfriend where everything is. And I look, and in his back pocket is this crunched up copy of the Killer Angels.
Ah,
So that's where he got his information. I love that. I mean, that's a direct reference to the fact that my father's book still 50 years later still influences people.
absolutely. That's pretty cool.
Amazing.
Mhm.
Yeah, for sure. Anne wants to know, what was the most difficult book for you to write?
Probably, I talked about the World War I story, and that was probably it. That should have been two books. My
Hmm.
publisher did not think two books would sell on World War One, so I had to combine it all together. But you've got the Flying Ace story, the Lafayette Escadrille, the Red Baron. So you've got that whole story, and then you've got Blackjack Pershing and the Marines.
Hmm.
There's that whole story. So it's two complete things. And it's my longest book as a result of that. But it was tough because, just like most people, I didn't know anything about World War One.
Yeah.
Who is taught World War One in school? Nobody. So
Yeah.
that was a real research project of trying to get through. I never heard of Raoul Lufberry.
Yeah.
Most people have no idea who that is. That's the finest fighting ace we ever produced in this country. But he didn't survive the war, so nobody remembers him. So, and of course everybody remembers the Red Baron. And then I was appalled when I was going around the country at how many people thought the Red Baron was a pizza place.
Oh,
Well, it is a pizza place, but excuse me, this guy deserves a little more credit than that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I
That's what.
actually I enjoy learning about World War One more than World War Two, and maybe part of that is because I live near Kansas City, where the National World War One
Yeah,
Museum is. I've been there like
right.
a dozen times, and I've taken field
Mhm.
trips there. I spent at least 2 weeks teaching my students about that war because to me, like World War Two is just like the sequel,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and so yeah, like that kind of it really hurts. Somebody commented as well, like it hurts to hear that your publisher was like, "Oh, that's not going to sell." Like it will
Mhm.
sell if you try to sell to them. Like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, that's frustrating.
No, what I've said actually many times, sort of what you just said, is that World War II I mean, there is no World War II. World War
Right?
Yeah.
One just continues. I mean, it
Yeah.
goes on for
Exactly.
that 20-year period, and then it starts up all over again. But it's the same war. I mean, it's the
Yeah.
same characters for the most part, and the level of horror is every bit as good or
Yeah.
bad.
Well, and I still find it amazing. Like, for example, we have many different antique shops that are up and down US 460, for example. And I just happened to be traveling along 460 one day and stopped in a place that was basically a junkyard. And I'm rummaging through boxes of stuff, and I find what was the equivalency of World War One veterans' Purple Heart, which was the
Hmm.
long form letter
Hmm.
that's signed by the president at the bottom. And it just amazed me that the World War One history is still out there and available and stuffed in boxes and just all over the place that you can
That's
be able to
crazy.
pull up for yourself just like
Well,
that.
think about, I mean, World War II, you've got grandfathers. I mean,
Yeah,
so you got people right there, that are reasonably close. World War One, you got great grandfathers,
yeah,
and that gap, I think, makes a big difference in people's awareness. Families just don't pay as much attention to great granddad
no,
the way they do to grandpa.
yeah.
Mhm.
And it's kind of almost like the Lost War, really. It's sandwiched in between so much, and people just kind of look right over it.
Well, I would save that description for Korea.
Yeah,
Mhm.
which you have also written about.
Yeah, yeah, I saw that. I have to check that one out. My grandpa fought in Korea, and I'm making a Korean War video here soon, as a matter of fact. So
Very
Yeah,
cool.
yeah, that's probably my best book.
no kidding.
The Frozen Hours. Yeah. It got 3 awards, including one from the Congressional Medal of Honor Society, which is about as cool as it gets.
Yeah,
So yeah, I was very happy with that book. I had living veterans in my living room, telling me stories who are all deceased now, which is horrible. But yeah, that I was able to get so much great personal information for the grunts. Um, and I think it made a big difference.
yeah, for sure. Well, David Ivy asked me, do you have any stories from the places that you went to when you were writing these books? For example, any kind of personal connections to those fields that you had?
I probably have personal connections to all of them
Okay.
because that's that my father taught me that when he was working on Killer Angels, we went to Gettysburg. I was a kid, and we wandered all over the ground. He and I walked Pickett's Charge, all of that, and that gave him sort of the fuel for writing his story. And I remember that. So I've done that in every book I've written, with two exceptions. My first book on World War II, The Rising Tide, takes place in North Africa and Sicily. Well, I wanted to go to North Africa. I wanted to see. I heard that all that equipment, the British stuff and the German stuff, is all still there. It's in the desert, so nothing happens to it. Oh, that would be cool. And I talked to the State Department, and they said, we really don't want Americans wandering around the desert, Libyan desert.
Yeah,
So okay, point taken. Then I mean, I'm researching, and this is one of my great embarrassments. I'm researching the Korea book, the story of the Chosin Reservoir. I wanted to go to the Chosin Reservoir. I thought,
Hmm.
that you got to go see that, for sure. Then I found out, oops, the Chosin Reservoir is in the north. It's in North Korea. Again, guy at the State Department says, well, we can get you in. The sentence ended right there. So,
But
oh wow.
yeah, so my wife says, no, we're not done. And you forget that idea. We're not doing that. So it's, there are limits sometimes to the research. But I mean, I'll tell you a good one. I was at Pearl Harbor. I was standing on the Arizona Memorial. And I mean, I don't know how many people have been there. I hope everybody goes there.
I was just there.
Yeah, you stare down in the water, and here's the hulk of the Arizona. Um, and I mean, and then there's the oil gradually coming up out of the water. That it's really something to see. And there was a docent there, an old guy, and he was giving a little speech. And there was a little cluster of about 10 people around him. Um, and this what he says was, everybody has a reason for being here. And so
yeah.
anybody have something they want to say about why they're here. This elderly woman says, there's a picture of me down there.
Oh wow.
Her boyfriend was on the Arizona, a photograph of her. I mean, that was intense. Um,
Yeah.
Yeah,
the other part of that is there are always Japanese tourists.
Yeah.
Why? I just so, and you're never going to know, but I just wonder, what are they thinking? I mean,
I
this was
mean,
like their great moment. This was their biggest victory of the war. Is that what they're thinking? Or are they thinking, oh, geez, I wish we hadn't done this because then we got beat? I don't know, but you'll never know. It's funny. Look at the faces. You can't tell anything they're thinking.
yeah. Well, when I was out there with the military, because I did a few detachments out there myself at Pearl Harbor, and one of the most striking things to me was standing on the sidewalks on the base and seeing the bullet holes in the ground that trailed all the way across the sidewalk and base housing, where
Yeah.
civilians essentially were
Hmm.
housed, and going over towards the barracks where the airmen were, running up the side of those barracks. I mean, it really puts you into a different perspective, because normally for a Civil War buff, your history is face to face. It's across
Right.
an open field. But when you're standing and you see the bullet holes in the ground and you're looking up in the air, it gives you this whole other dimension of warfare that could be approaching you as you're standing in literally what was a nightmare for people.
Yeah, there's a aircraft hangar, kind of off the base a little ways, and it's old. I mean, it looks like it's from World War II, and it has glass kind of up around the top of it, glass windows, and they're busted to pieces. I
Yeah,
mean, and the guy told me, he said, there, Dan Martinez, who was the chief historian there, who is a wonderful guy, he said, that was left alone. They've never replaced the glass. There's no reason to, but there it is.
yeah,
That shows you.
that's for sure. Well, I know we do a lot of people ask you a lot of questions about your father, and
Okay.
I'd like to know, what kind of an inspiration was your mother to you in your career?
One thing I will say, my father was a failed author, which
Yeah,
sounds weird, but I mean, he was not successful. He never made a living from his writing, even with a Pulitzer Prize. He was a sci-fi author in the 50s, right? Then he became sort of a straight fiction in the 60s. Wrote a novel that came out in 68 that nobody read. And then The Killer Angels, came out in 74. So he had a minimal career, but could never make a living from his writing. My mother worked for the state of Florida for 37 years to pay the bills
yeah,
because he couldn't. So I don't know. I think that was a source of enormous embarrassment to him, especially guy wins a Pulitzer Prize.
yeah,
If you're an author and you win a Pulitzer Prize, you have every right to believe that your ships come in.
yeah,
Everything's going to happen. It's going to be good. The publishers are going to fight over your next work. Your book's going to become a bestseller. None of that happened to my father. He went on to write other things. He wrote a baseball novel called For Love of the Game, which was made into a movie by Kevin Costner. People have no idea that my father wrote the book for that. Yeah, I mean, it's really, I'm actually in the movie. But later in his life, he wrote a Hitchcock sci-fi novel that just didn't work, and his brain was starting to deteriorate on him. And in 1988, he had his second heart attack, which was
mm,
fatal. He was 59,
yeah,
but he was a 4-pack a day man.
ah,
My job, you talk about inspiration, my job as a kid was every morning to get up and go around and empty the ashtrays, which is why I
wow,
never I never smoked.
yeah,
Mm.
It was pretty disgusting. So, but I mean, older as it went on, I don't know that she was that much of an influence on me because after he died, she was still sort of carrying his torch.
okay,
In fact, at one point after about my fourth or fifth book, she said to me, and you talk about bittersweet, and I don't mean like I'm airing dirty laundry here, but I mean, she said to me, "Why is the good stuff happening to you?"
oh,
I mean, I had you sort of sit back and and absorb that a little bit. But the point is, she's representing my father. She felt like she was representing my father, and here I come along, the novice,
yeah,
and stumble into, and my first 5 books are bestsellers.
yeah,
Um, it's a legitimate question, I guess. Why is it happening to me? I don't have the answer to that, but maybe it's because my father simply opened the door, and maybe I owe him that debt because he never could capitalize on that himself.
yeah. Yeah, and a lot of it has to do with timing too, when it comes to certain things as well. I mean,
Well, yeah,
the
the reason why he wasn't successful in the 70s when he won the Pulitzer Prize, think about the 70s. It's the
yeah,
end of the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to read a book about generals. I mean, so even with the
Hmm.
Pulitzer, it never sold anything to speak of.
yeah. Well, it was definitely a fantastic piece of work, that's for sure, and it inspired generations and generations of people.
Still is. One thing
Yeah.
about, we just had the 50th anniversary, which is amazing to me that it's been 50 years, 1974, and people still buy it in big numbers, and people come up to me and say, "Oh my God, this is the best book I ever read." It's amazing. I mean, it just keeps going.
Yeah, for sure. What kind of work do you do with the Adams County Historical Society?
Well, first of all, I support them any way I can. I mean,
Yeah.
I've given them money and so forth. But there's one specific thing I did, which I'm really proud of. They have an immersive experience in the back of the museum. It's a house, small home, as it would have been in Gettysburg in 1863, and except that it has nothing to do with soldiers. You go into the house, the door closes. It's sort of all automated. The door closes, and below you, which would be the basement of the house, the cellar, you hear the family, and they're scared to death, and they're talking. There's the dog, I mean, and all of this stuff. And then the more that happens, and the thing is, then what happens is the house itself, bullet holes open up. Things are starting to come by. There's the sound of a cannon, I mean, shell exploding, which is pretty intense. Um, my point is, I wrote the script for that. I
Oh,
wrote the
that's cool.
script for the family in the basement. That was
Uh,
neat. Yeah, I mean, I
yeah.
had fun with that. We agonized over what we're going to name the dog, because there are so many names that you would think of that make sense. Were not common names in 1863, so we had to go back, find. I mean, that's how silly it can be, but you need to get it right.
Yeah, yeah. Matt, you are kind of diving into writing yourself, aren't you?
I've written a couple books, but they are nonfiction, and so I feel like just strictly like I tell a lot of stories about things that are a lot harder to tell story, like because I feel like young men in particular are drawn to war stories,
Yeah.
but I'm telling a story about the Supreme Court, like boring. So I just I guess I don't know. This is kind of like I wanted to ask you this question before I forget. So forgive me if I'm kind of going off track here a little bit, but I I'm just a little bit concerned with like young men these days, like in their perception of what war is, what war means,
Mhm.
because especially Americans. I mean, the last war where we had a draft was the Vietnam War. The last war where pretty much everybody like was involved, even on the home front, was World War II. I mean, we're now at 80 years since that's happened, and there's not even that many World War II vets left. I just did a video on that. The fact that there's just a few, like tens of thousands left. That's it. So do you like what is being lost? Like what do these young men need to know about what war means? And can you do that in your stories?
I think you're right. The young people don't get it. And if you tell them a World War II story or a Korea story or World War One, they have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And so you have to bring them in, and that's hard. Um, I don't know what you do about that. I mean, it starts with what's taught in school.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, but if you think about me, kind of what you just said, this is an approximate number, but approximately every 20 to 30 years in our history, we've had a war. And you can go back and, the Revolution, War of 1812, the Mexican War, the Civil War, the Spanish American War, World War One, World War Two, Korea, Vietnam. I mean, just carry it all the way up. And it's not exactly 20 years, but it's generational. Now that hasn't happened. I mean, we had Iraq, and we had the Gulf, but even that's 25 years ago when it started. So um, young people today are spoiled. They've never had to lose a friend in combat. They've never had to go to a funeral of a classmate who was killed in combat. Now, I'm not saying everybody, but I mean, the point is the numbers that you would have in a war. That's gone. Well, on the one hand, yay, it's gone. We're not fighting wars right now, but something's lost, and in the awareness of young people of just what's valuable. And I feel bad about that, but I don't have a solution to it.
Well,
It's a,
I can
it's a
tell
tough
you,
one.
anytime you get near a place where you know combat's about to happen or is happening, you'll learn real fast. You know, um, exactly what's important. Hopefully, many Americans will never have to
Mhm.
experience that for sure.
Well, I'll say this too. Who fights wars? 18-year-olds.
Yeah,
That's who fights wars. So
18 to 40.
and they fight the wars because they don't know any better. They're being picked to do this, and it sounds great. There's that bravado and the macho and all that stuff that 18-year-olds will embrace. That 30-year-olds are like, you got to be kidding. So I mean, that's a oversimplification, but I think the point is, 18-year-olds today, they're just totally oblivious, and that's a shame.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a hard topic to touch on though. I mean, especially when you're telling these stories and you're walking these fields. And I think that, after spending so long in the military, what I like to try to do is tell people from the perspective of, you're here, you're seeing these things, this is happening around you. This isn't some brave and glorious thing that's happening in front of you. This is this is something that is absolutely terrible and horrendous, and a lot of times can be necessary depending on
Mhm.
what the reason for it is. But it's still something that it's just these people are never going to get over it. Their
It,
lives are
it
completely
is
changed.
brave and glorious until the shooting starts.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's for sure. Yeah. Um, Don Rich asked if you've ever felt anything that was along the lines of the supernatural when you're on the fields.
When I was working on Gods and Generals, my first book, and I had no idea what I was doing. And I actually remember when I sat down and I was living in Montana, and I sat down, looked at the computer, that the blank page one, and I started to laugh. And I said, what in the world are you doing? And then, all the way through it, I felt like I'm not writing this book. It's not my father, leaning over
Mm,
my shoulder, but I felt like I'm just a conduit. I'm telling you what these guys are saying because they're telling me. Now, I don't see ghosts, and I'm not mystical, and that's never happened to me again. It just
yeah,
happened to me with the first book. But just the notion that, and maybe it was because I wasn't worthy enough to be writing this book, and so my insecurities are all over the place. But it really felt like that. I felt like I'm just a conduit. They're
yeah.
talking over here, and I'm telling you what they're saying. That was pretty weird.
Wow, that's pretty neat.
Mhm.
Well, with your upcoming work that you may have going on, I've heard a rumor something about you doing possibly something on Texas or Texas Revolution or something like that.
That's
Was that ever in
been
the works?
that's been bounced around for a long time. There was one of the principal people at my publisher, like the executive vice president thing. He's a fanatic for Texas, fanatic for the Alamo and all that, and he begged me to do that story. He's gone. He quit. so,
Oh,
so there's nobody there to publish anymore. And the people who are there, my editor, my publisher, are really lukewarm on the
ah,
subject. What he used to tell me is people in Texas buy books,
yeah,
and they especially buy books about Texas.
yeah,
Yes,
Sounds
they
good.
do.
Sounds good, but I can't convince my publisher now that that's a thing.
yeah,
I mean, never say never. I mean, it's certainly down the road, but I've got my hands full right now.
yeah. Well, Matt, I'm going to turn it over to you and see if you have any more questions you'd like to ask Mr. Shara here.
Yeah, I mean, okay, this is forgive me if this is like a not appropriate, but I like I said before, I was a big fan of the movie Gettysburg as a kid, and then as an adult, like I think I was in college, I watched Gods and Generals, and that's based off of your book, and it was a bit more controversial in terms okay, I want to be nice here, but a lot of people didn't seem to like it either. I was bored with the movie, um, and I just want to get your honest thoughts on did the movie portray what it was supposed to?
I've got a bunch of honest thoughts, and I have
Okay.
to be and I have to be careful what I say. I've told a lot of people The movie Gettysburg is 90% of the Killer Angels.
Mm,
I mean, some of the dialogue, the scenery, I mean, it's incredible how they got that right. Gods and Generals is about 10% of my book.
mhm.
When I saw the uncut, unedited version in Hollywood in a screening room, 6 hour version, um, this should have been the happiest day of my life. I mean, here's my movie on the screen.
Yeah.
Instead, there were scenes that made me squirm in my chair.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh,
Wow.
what have they done? Well, when the movie comes out, people started telling me what they thought, of course. And 20% of the people that I heard from loved the movie. That's great. They're taking their kids, oh, fine, that's wonderful. The other 80%, how could you let them butcher your book like that? I heard that so many times.
Yeah.
So, yeah, what I learned in Hollywood, and my father would have learned it had he lived, is, it's the author's job to stay out of the way.
Yeah.
And, there were times when I offered corrections. I offered things that they were getting wrong, things they were
Hmm.
pronunciation of names and things like that. And they would say, "Oh, yeah, that's great. Thank you." And then they go right back to doing what they were doing. And I mean, it was extremely frustrating because Gods and Generals lost so much money for Ted
Mhm.
Turner. That was the reason why he dropped the project to do the last full measure. People are always asking me, where's the third movie? There will be no third movie. So, what a shame, because
Yeah.
that would have been a great trilogy on film that would have been beloved. People would have embraced that. And now there's the first two, and Gods and Generals is just sort of languishing. So it's unfortunate, but again, and I can say a lot more things, but I won't. But I learned a lot about Hollywood and the film business with that movie.
Yeah. Now, I think for one, think it's definitely incomplete because I mean that last full measure, man, if that thing would have been made,
Make
you
that a
know,
movie. Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah,
Gosh,
Jeff,
dang.
it was Jeff Daniels said to me that when we told him sorry we're not making last full measure, he was really upset.
yeah,
And you don't want to get Jeff upset. He's but he because he's thinking what a role for an actor to play Joshua Chamberlain receiving the surrender at Appomattox. How
yes,
cool is that for an
oh yes,
actor? And he was so looking forward to that. Not anymore.
not anymore. Yeah,
No.
that's unfortunate. I mean, maybe in the future, you never know. Down the line, I mean, something could come back around, and then that book becomes a movie again or a series. But
I'm
that's
sorry if it was a.
originally,
I'm sorry if it was a sore subject to bring up. I feel bad now.
No, I mean
Read the.
it's
Check out the books, everyone.
it's a legitimate subject, and especially when people walk up to me and say, "Oh, I saw Gods and Generals," and you can tell by their attitude, it was like they don't want to say any more. And then
yeah.
I'll tell them, I don't care. I don't know how many times I've said this phrase: "The book is better than the movie."
Oh, it is. Yeah.
Almost always is.
Yeah, 100%. I
Mhm.
definitely enjoyed the book for sure, and there were some squirmy moments in the movie, that's for sure. Well, Jeff, do you have anything coming up that you'd like to put out there to the audience, or anything that you'd like to let them know
Yeah,
about?
I got a couple things. One, I just finished the manuscript for a novel on Abraham Lincoln from Lincoln's own point of view. Harold Holzer, who's one of the top Lincoln scholars in the country, this was his idea. He said, nobody's done this before. The historians can't do it, and there could be a market for this. So I convinced my publisher. I just finished it, and it's in New York right now with my editor, and I've got to go there and do our thing. The other issue is. And I'm a shameless name dropper. Those of you who are Civil War fans or the movie Gettysburg and Gods and Generals, you probably know the name Stephen Lang. If you've seen Avatar or Tombstone, you probably know the name Stephen Lang. Well, he and I are partners. We created a screenplay on the 50th anniversary of Gettysburg in 1913. This enormous reunion of 54,000 old veterans came back to this thing, surprised everybody that there were that many. And the party line is, "Oh, we're coming back in a spirit of brotherhood and love, and all the hatchets are buried and blah blah blah." No, Not at all. That's what the politicians were saying. But to
Yeah.
these 54,000 guys and a few individuals that we've created, it's a very different situation. And, there's PTSD, there's hatred of the other side, there's racial stuff. I mean, all kinds of things. Well, we wrote that screenplay, and now I'm taking the screenplay and converting it to a novel.
Oh,
And it's
that's
a
cool.
long way from being done. But I mean, this is good. This is a good story that
Yeah.
most people have no idea. Most people have never heard of this. So I'm having a lot of fun with that.
Yeah, it's definitely funny how the hands of time have kind of changed the perspective on what those men were doing on those fields and
Yep.
hanging out together in kumbaya. And I'm
Hmm.
fairly certain that's not the case.
No. And well, another thing, the famous photograph that maybe a lot of people have seen is
Yeah.
when you got the Confederates and the Union and they come together at the stone wall and there's all this handshaking and pat on
Yep.
the back and hugging and all that stuff. They had to do that twice.
Yeah.
Because
Oh.
the first time there was issues, there was somebody filming it, and there were issues, and they said, "Okay, people, go back and let's do it again." I mean, take some of the spontaneity out of it. So
Yeah.
I mean, it was very much a staged event.
Yeah, for sure. Matt, how about you? What do you got coming up?
Yeah, video about the Korean War coming up. And next week I've got a geography video. I do those sometimes about why the 25 biggest American cities exist. But
Very
Cool.
cool.
yeah,
Mhm.
Well, Mr. Sher, we really appreciate you coming on the channel here and having a
yes,
conversation with me and Mr. Beat.
Enjoyed
Um,
it. Thank you. I love talking about all this stuff, so I appreciate that.
yes, sir. It's definitely been interesting, and I loved every minute of it. And I'm sure I'll see you up there in Gettysburg for that film festival to get that
Yep.
autograph. Um, I really appreciate it though, and you too, there, Mr. Beat, for appearing on the channel here and having a conversation with us. Thank you both very
thanks
much.
for having me.
Great. My pleasure.
Thanks.
All right, we'll see everybody else out there on the field. I couldn't think of a better place to end this video than right here in the middle of the woods, the Battle of the Wilderness, at the hotly contested Brocken Plank Road, Orange Plank Road. Not too far in that direction, Longstreet's wounded. Right here where I'm at right now is a place where men like Wadsworth and Hayes end up losing their lives. Families lose loved ones. Soldiers burn to death in these fields around me here. If you'll let these fields do it, they'll touch your soul.